right. Well, I know some folks are still certainly filtering in here, but since we have such a limited time today, let's get started with some introductions. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Joanna Sirk-Smith, and I am the Associate Director for State Outreach at Carolina Public Humanities, and I'm so pleased to be joining you as a co-moderator this evening. Now, hopefully many of you here with us tonight were able to watch the documentary Invisible Hand, but even if you were not able to watch that before this panel discussion, we're still so glad that you're joining us to talk through these important themes. I want to give a huge thank you to the folks at Public Herald Studios for their help in arranging tonight's screening, and a huge thank you as well to our panelists. And last but not least, a huge thank you to Francesca Sorbara for organizing this evening's event. Francesca is a PhD candidate in anthropology at UNC Chapel Hill, and she is also a Maynard Adams Fellow for the Public Humanities, one of a small group of advanced graduate students who has been working with Carolina Public Humanities on publicly engaged scholarship this past year. So Francesca, thank you so much for the work that you've put into organizing today's conversation, and I will hand it over to you to handle introductions.
Thank you, Joanna, very much. And welcome again to the panel, The Rights of Nature in the U.S., Legal and Social Debates. Thank you again also to Carolina Public Humanities for making this film screening and outreach event possible. So I'm really very pleased to be able to dialogue today with Marky Miller, Tisha Dell, and Catherine Adme. I've had the pleasure of being one of ADME's students back in 2017, and I have followed the work of CLDF, Community Environmental Defense Fund, and of the communities that I collaborate with since my arrival in the US in 2016 for my PhD in cultural anthropology. So as the presentation of this event states, the rights of nature are increasingly taking center stage in public debates around environmental justice, ethics, climate change, and are becoming a rallying cry for the global environmental movement. And we saw a very good example of these debates in the documentary that we just watched. My research investigates aspects and the specific case of the rights of nature in Latin America. And I designed this event as a way to expand and enrich this ethnographic research of mine. My work specifically investigates the rights of nature in the Amazon basin of Colombia, where the Colombian Supreme Court has granted the Colombian Amazon region the status of subjects of right in 2018 in order to slow down the increasing deforestation of the Amazon. But as an anthropologist, I'm also and always interested in the contradictions that there are and discourses, legal devices in our societies. And in the Colombian case, this new legislation is presenting some contradiction and challenges, especially for local rural communities living in the Amazon. So tonight's debate is another way of looking at this diverse emerging paradigm and an attempt to understand together what are the possibilities, but also the challenges that the rights of nature offer and raise for grassroots communities affected by environmental extraction and pollution. So we will be dialoguing around this theme, thanks to the work and passion of 3 engaged practitioners who have been working for decades to defend the rights of different communities. So I would really like to start off our panel by letting Marky, Tish, and Adme introduce themselves to start off tonight's conversation. And then we will come back to questions.
Well, thank you. I'll get us started here. Really happy to be part of this tonight. My name is Marky Miller. I also come from an anthropology background as an undergrad, so it's nice to be kind of back in that realm again. I'm a volunteer organizer with the Lake Erie Bill of Rights in Toledo, Ohio. Today, I work for CLDF as part of their communications team. I think it's important to stress, though, that I was a lead organizer. I was often the spokesperson for LIBOR, but I certainly didn't do any of that work on my own. I have a really dedicated team that I work with locally. So I just want to put that out there, and also recognizing that I am not an expert in this field. I'm still learning and I'm still growing with the movement.
And I'm Tish O'Dell. I'm with the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, and welcome everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this event. I started in my own community, as many of you probably have as well. That's what got me motivated. My background is in business. It's not in environmental studies or any of that. I'm actually an accounting major. But we were facing in our own backyard in our community. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, and so about 10 miles from Lake Erie, and it was oil and gas and fracking that was coming to my community. And I grew up in this community. I feel very connected to my community, and I had a son. And so once I learned, there was dangers with this and hazards, and they were putting it next to the school, that's what got me involved and motivated. And I've been working for about a decade now with CELDF. We did pass in Ohio the first Rights of Nature Charter Amendment in Ohio. And even though the courts overturned that law after several lawsuits, we had over 40 more attempts and several more pass in the state. So that's an important lesson for people, I think, to understand that when you're in a movement, there's not gonna be one case that happens in one place that's going to change everything. So I'll just leave it for there, and we'll talk more about this as the evening goes on.
Thank you. So I am Catherine Admay, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I actually go by Admay. I think that the motivation for me being here and being a human rights lawyer who teaches the Sanford Public Policy School, which is part of Duke University, is that I grew up, like Tish and Marky are saying, I think people are moved towards fighting for justice when they are close up against injustice and can see it very, very clearly and understand what I think that beautiful film showed us, that you have to fight for the things you believe in. They're not going to look after themselves. And I grew up in South Africa, which is a country that is just so marred with injustice and is so beautiful with the people and the land that seeks a better way always. And so what I bring, even though I sound American, that was kind of one of the things I had to do to manage being exile immigrant, kicked out of the country, South African. One of the things that impelled me into being a human rights lawyer is the idea that we need to work alongside each other. Right, that human rights lawyers are not the classic lawyers, right? We're the kind of lawyers who work alongside communities. And so I'm really glad to get to be on this panel alongside you guys who've done some amazing work.
Great. Thank you very much, Tish, Marky, and Annie. So I would like to start with the first questions, just starting up with the documentary that is precisely. So what do we know about the latest development happening now or that have recently happened with the Grand Township and the Lake Erie cases that are portrayed in the documentary?
I'll take Grant first, Marky. Okay. So the film, I'm not sure, I haven't watched the film in a while. I've seen it several times, but I didn't watch it today, where it actually leaves off in the Grant case, because the Grant case is still going on and it's evolving. We know that the DEP sued Grant in 2017, and I believe the movie covers that. So, you really have to consider what that means. So that's the Department of Environmental Protection suing the community for trying to protect its environment. They're trying to protect, obviously, their water supply. And so Grant filed counterclaims against the Department of Environmental Protection, asking the court to declare that the charter was indeed valid law. Under Pennsylvania is a little different than the other states because they have an environmental rights amendment in their constitution. Most of us don't have that. And that DEP had failed its duty to protect Pennsylvanians' clean air and water under that amendment. And so DEP has several times sought over the last few times unsuccessfully to have Grant's counterclaims dismissed. But in the spring of 2020, DEP rescinded its permit for the fracking waste injection well in Grant, and they actually cited the charter as applicable local law. So, no matter what happens, that alone can be used by the community, because here you have the government agency citing the charter as the reason for pulling the permit. And that's huge. I know that people maybe who aren't that in tune to all this, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is. And in February of this year, 2021, PGE intervened in a case on the side of DEP. Now, PGE is the corporation. In March of 2021, Seneca Resources, another oil and gas company, they filed a petition to intervene in the case, which is also pending. And the case isn't scheduled to go to trial until October of 2021. So right now they're, doing depositions and all those kind of things. So that's where Grant Township is currently.
Yeah, and I can give an update on Libor real quick. Obviously, Libor was overturned in the film. They showed that overturned by one judge, despite being approved by all the voters. But the power of Libor really remains in how many people it continues to inspire and call to action. And I think it needs to remain in our local narrative. If a project or a permit proposed would be in violation of Lake Erie's rights, or would, impede on our rights and our access, then residents have to bring it up. Right? It might not be law anymore, but a big part of this work is being an advocate for the change you want to see, regardless of the likelihood that you're going to get that traditional win. There is actually a second lawsuit that was brought by 3 residents in Toledo who worked on the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. They brought this against the state of Ohio for violating their rights. The case is Mike Ferner et al. Versus the state of Ohio. It's pro se, which means they don't have a lawyer representing them. They're doing this on their own. And it was filed in state court. The lower court ruled in favor of the state, but the residents appealed that decision. And in the fall of last year, the appellate court actually ruled in favor of the residents and sent the case back to the lower court, saying that, yeah, these citizens do have a claim to make, and the lower court needs to hear their case. So a motion to dismiss that was denied, and now the case has been set for February of 2022. So we're kind of staying tuned around that, but certainly the case should hold. It shouldn't hold up the movement at all locally, because it is being led in a way that we can just make our arguments sort of in plain English. We don't have to speak in legalese. But I wouldn't say that we're waiting for a decision before we do anything with that. We're still on the ground looking for opportunities to intervene and make this part of the discussion.
I wonder if it's okay. Can I ask a question, Tish? Because I'm not sure. I just finished watching the film, and so I know what the film said, and I was really excited when the film said that the PG&E's permit was revoked because Pennsylvania decided that it was going to honor the ordinance. That seems like a huge victory. Is that still the case?
Well, yeah, and you have to understand there's 2 cases. So there was the federal case, and now Grant Township is actually filed in state court. So there are 2 different cases. And so they put a stay on the federal case right now. And so the one was mentioning is the one in state court that actually Grant Township filed against the state. So yeah, they get really cut, but it's again, because we want to get, we're trying to make a point. And each of these cases shows the public, that they really don't have a voice or rights, or, they can't protect their community and the environment. And so no matter what happens in the cases, and I put Ferner versus state of Ohio that Marky talked about, the pro se, in the chat, only because it's a lot more fun to read, because it's not written by lawyers and traditional legalese, and the people are actually writing what they really truly believe and want the court to do. So it's a more interesting case for non-lawyers to read. But yeah, so it does get, we get mired down in all that legalese stuff, and then we forget, the average citizens a lot of times. That's one of the things we fall back on, right? And we go, it's too complicated. I don't understand what they're saying. And so people sit back and just think, well, I'll let the lawyers handle it. And we can't do that, you know, or the courts, because the change isn't going to come from the court. When you think what courts are, courts interpret the law. So the law that's as written, they're trying to interpret that. Well, there are no laws for rights of nature right now. So that's what we're trying to change. And so they'll be last. We need the laws first. We need the public pressure to pressure the system, so that then the courts ultimately will be the last ones, I'm assuming.
Although, I mean, part of the reason why I jumped in, Tish,
Yeah.
and Francesca, you can tell me to stop dynamizing, as you say, but part of the reason I jumped in was that I do think it's so important for ordinary people to know that when we do these things, right, and when we do use the legitimacy of the law, right, which is to say, we as the people can have a people's charter, and that people's charter will be the reason that our state elected officials will decide to withdraw a permit. Like, that's actually a serious hard power win, right? Like, that's not just like we talk, right? That's like we got something to happen that is very unusual, because the law actually, you know, delivers. The law delivers for some people. We want to make sure that the law delivers for those who are trying to protect both communities and the earth, right? So I think we also need to see that it was a court in Ecuador that protected that, you know, that protected that river. So we want to create the conditions in which the law can be read so the judges can read it so that we can win, because we need to win.
Mm-hmm. Right, and the courts and legal is one way to do that. But the pressure, like in Grant Township, they're very fortunate because they have town supervisors. So their electeds support this and are willing to fight for it. You know, and that's pressure from the people in the community. So that all makes an impact.
Yeah, that's great. My next, I mean, what you said ties to a lot of questions that I have in my mind. But before going again back to the role of different institutions and also the role of lawyers, which kind of law in which countries, because also I studied Latin America, in which the state is something else from what the state and different bodies of the state are in the U.S. I would like just a little bit for people to have a better and wider scenario about what are other cases that you're following in the U.S. And as you as activist and practitioner, you are in the middle of what's happening in the country, not only the cases that you follow, but also other cases. So what are the latest major developments and advancement or not so in the US that you have seen in the last, I don't know, couple of years or that are happening now?
You want me to take that, Marky, to start, and then you can jump in? Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting because it's really growing at leaps and bounds. And it's funny because sometimes when you're in the middle of a movement for systemic change and structural change, it's hard to see it because you're working in your own community. We actually have a graph put together, a timeline where we kind of tracked it so people can see it's an upward movement, because you can get really discouraged when you just stay in your community and you get knocked down or your law shut, you don't see what's happening around. And so you're right, they talked about Colombia. And it's very interesting that the very first rights of nature law in, you know, settler colonial Western law came from Tamaqua Borough, which is a small rural community in Pennsylvania. So not from some progressive big city somewhere, but from this rural small town. And that after that, it took 2 more years, and then that's when Ecuador saw it. So, you know, just that evolution of how it happens. We think sometimes that what we're doing isn't going to make an impact. Toledo, Marky can talk to that, didn't know they were going to make such an impact and affect this whole movement, which they did. So in the United States now, I mean, we have a case out in Oregon that's going on, and that's Lane County, and they were trying to stop aerial pesticide spraying. They passed their law, and it was also challenged by the corporations. That's currently going on there. And it's just interesting to me that there's places all over the United States. So I'm dealing with people, we were on a call last night in Minnesota, Minneapolis. They're looking at rights of the Mississippi River. I'm working with a group in Cincinnati, Ohio, looking at rights of the Ohio River, working with some groups in Nova Scotia. trying to protect the forest there from deforestation, plus the idea that now, and it's so ridiculous because tribes and tribal nations have always believed, you know, in rights of nature, but they don't call it that, but it's this obligation that we're part of nature. We're not separated. That's another thing that in Western culture we have to deal with, that we're separate from nature, not part of it. We are nature. And so there's this cultural shift that has to happen besides just the legal shift that has to happen. And that's what Lake Erie was so great at doing. I mean, it's helping people. It flipped in a lot of people's brains to think about this, like, well, wait a minute, why does nature not have rights? Corporations have rights, right? Google has rights, Microsoft has rights, but nature doesn't have any rights. Lake Erie doesn't. Why is that? So on a real basic level, it flipped that switch for many people. So it's definitely moving in leaps and bounds forward and bringing in Indigenous people and their cultural knowledge and ways of thinking about nature is becoming critical. So it's like thinking globally, but then acting locally.
Tish, thank you. I would like to jump in here because you also mentioned the Constitution of Ecuador, and CLDF participated in the drafting of the Constitution in Ecuador in 2008. And this was the first constitution in the world incorporating the rights of nature in it. Do you think possible, but of course, Latin America is different, states are different. Do you think possible that the rights of nature aspire to ever be given a national and federal recognition in the United States? And if for this to happen, what should change in what is today's American environmental law, and not only environmental law, and what are today's American institutions? Because there are very contradictory portrayals of EPA and others institution, and in your recent words in the documentary. So I think that this question can tie up also with ADME and all of you.
Mark, you want to address the regulatory framework?
Yeah, I'm just sitting here like there's so much to unpack.
I know.
I think there's a lot going on. Like the idea that it can go upward and, you know, just be this more universal idea is certainly something that I think everyone has in their minds. But I also feel like local voices really need to inform this movement, and not just right now, but all the time. It's that local knowledge, your sense of place, those things that you're more intimately connected with, what the needs are, what's missing, what the harm is. And of course, we run the risk of things getting watered down and co-opted and changed. And that speaks to that question of what else needs to change. Right now, we have the problems we have with Lake Erie and lots of different places because we are regulating the harm, we're permitting it, we're legalizing it, we're allowing it to happen. We're setting up standards that say this is how much you're allowed to be exposed to these different toxins, these different carcinogens. We're kind of setting that up of building a framework that allows us to keep doing what we know has an impact, rather than taking that more precautionary stance to say things interact, things flow, things drift, things can accumulate and have a bigger effect than the very narrow lens that we look at it to say, well, I have a permit, I followed the rules, I did the training, I did the certification, I'm doing all the best management practices. And just taking Lake Erie as an example, we know that the best management practices don't work for this area. We know that we have a drainage system that complicates that, and yet we don't have a unique way of looking at it. We want to propose ways to say, how can we keep this system going without having to give up what we're doing? And we never get back to the root cause. We never get back to, well, we need to stop putting X out there. We need to stop putting this in there. We find ways to mitigate and keep it going. And all the while we're having these conversations and we're adding more permits. That has not changed it. We've added, I don't even know how many, countless numbers of agricultural operations within our watershed since the water crisis. And those are continuing to be approved for review. There's far more that have been approved than have been rejected. And so that's just one tiny piece of it. But the way it is, I don't think rights of nature can coexist with the framework that we have now. It's really going to be the difference between reforming and rebuilding.
Wow, that's such a nicely put framing, Marquis. I mean, this is one of the big questions that lawyers always have, which is, given that the law is this very paradoxical instrument where it can either operate to control and channel power and serve those with the lowest kind of hard power, or it can be a way to magnify, amplify the power that exists and just legitimate it, right? So anybody who is ever a lawyer needs to be a critical lawyer, right? You need to be understanding whose side are you on as a lawyer, right? And how are you using this? How are you using this language, this legitimating language? Are you reproducing injustice while you claim to be doing justice, right? So this question is like fundamental question for all lawyers. And then there's a strategic question, which is, are you going to be a cultural lawyer, like that some of the folks on CELDEF's board I know come from an organization I know and love and was taught by, actually, Michael Ratner is one of my professors, which is Center for Constitutional Rights, which, really tries to like use the law to fundamentally put into question some of the ways in which the law legitimates this harmful work, right? How do you do that at the same time that you try to use whatever openings you have, right? So we know the revolution is not coming tomorrow, right? The revolution is going to take time to gather and build, and we should be doing that. There's no question in my mind, you see in the chat, that like we have a legal, political, cultural transformation that we need to be part of. And then the question is, what do we do about tomorrow? Like, how do we make it so that tomorrow you don't have a problem in Lake Erie, Marquis, right? So, I mean, I think that there has to be a way. I think that, or the activists amongst us have to find some space for the lawyers who are going to use the law as it stands now and do the best we can with it, right? And that goes back to like the 1970s. I mean, there's a very famous justice on the United States Supreme Court who took the position, this is William O. Douglas, who took the position in 1972 in a case that was brought by the Sierra Club, right? So this is like CELDEF is before CELDEF, right? The Sierra Club brought this case in Mineral King Valley. And basically, Douglas ended up dissenting, but he said, trees should have standing. We should have a way of understanding the injury that's being done to trees, not changing the Constitution, not coming up with a whole new legal system, right? But understanding that as we go about trying to like make horrible choices where power is being redistributed, we need to have a space for the trees. And he came up with that dissent in 1972, and we're pushing for that kind of idea, however many years, 50 years later. But I do think that there's a value in trying to get like the Supreme Court and other places that have serious power, they have it today, right, to take account of this fundamental fact that this movie does such a great job of putting on the table, which is that we all lose if we lose nature. There's nothing to be gained here. There's no smartness. Like the only smartness is to invest in ecosystems, right? It's what you were saying, right? This is the best investment you can make. You have to invest in these things that are the very basis of life. So why can't we try to, at the same time that we are, I mean, I guess this is the difficulty, right? How do you delegitimize the system that you're using, right? You want to be able to delegitimize the system, but you also need to use the system. And I think we just have to be honest in that contradiction that that's what we're doing.
Right. Well, and I think you bring up a really good point, Adme, and it's, and you brought it up, the power, this is about power and power shifts. And so we know where the power lies now. And so that's why you start out with an environmental issue. And that's why we really focus on community rights, and that rights of nature is a part of community rights. So again, that whole idea that the whole community, nature's part of that, the humans, the animals, the ecosystems, all of it are part of that community. And it's, again, we're trying to separate. So it's just that rights of nature is kind of taken off, but I kind of wish it was community rights that was taking off, because what we find, I mean, it doesn't matter. People are in the streets protesting about, wages. They're in the street protesting about police accountability. They're in the streets protesting about homelessness. And of course, then nature. And so this power shift, it is huge. And so if we're giving nature rights, that means we're taking it kind of away from maybe the corporate right entity. So in other words, if they're the ones doing the harm to the environment, we're going to rein that in, and we're going to say, no, we're not recognizing that. And the point that you bring up, I mean, corporation doesn't show up anywhere in our Constitution, that word. So that was granted by the courts. That wasn't, but again, so that idea, they push us to the top, that we have to somehow start at the top. And I don't think we can, because they're going to manipulate it. And you see it already happening at the top levels with all this green renewable stuff. They're giving false hope to people. I mean, this idea of carbon credits, that somehow we can buy our way out of this, right? So the polluters can pay to pollute is basically what that is. So those are the solutions at the top, because they are the powerful. And so they're going to protect the power. So it's got to always, I believe, come from the bottom up. And it can get to the top, but that pressure has to come from us at the bottom, pushing it upward.
Mhm.
Another just quick thing is, you bring up nature in our system, just so people, I don't remember if that was in the film, but nature in our system is property. And so that's totally different. It's not rights bearing. And Christopher Stone brought that up too, about how in the beginning it seems so weird for something that's rightless. When we even start talking about it, it sounds funny, it's laughable, until the rightless get rights.
Yeah, well, that's what they said about women too, right? We were property
Exactly.
once.
Right, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, that people laugh about it. Mhm.
So there are
Well, I
so
think-
many. Ooh, sorry, Marky, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to add that I think the more that we legitimize the system that we're given, the more power we just hand over. And if we can step away from that and try to get out of that role of, well, I was given the opportunity to submit a public comment, and I wrote my elected, and I made the best argument I could, and I learned as much as I could, and understanding that it's not necessarily about that, and it's not a issue of you didn't do a good enough job. It's recognizing that the system was set up for you to reach this point anyways. And it's unfortunate that even with this work, we usually end up in the courts, which again, as Tish had mentioned before, it's their job to interpret the law, but the laws aren't really there for them to bring in. So we're left using old standards. But I think it's also a great way to expose that system to people. And so we can use those moments that, even though they feel like horrible losses, and they can be really devastating to see all your hard work just get thrown out like that, because one judge just doesn't want to be the responsible for making the wave. But it's a great way to show that you were a threat and that you had more power than you thought you had. The Libor ruling said that, you're vague and unenforceable. You're just this community value statement. But it also said that we caused harm to the state of Ohio's permitting process, which was the point. That was exactly what we wanted to do. So it showed that we were effective. And all the ways that we were taken down and all the obstacles we faced were done with these sort of closed door tactics, and slipping things into the budget bill, and having this huge corporate funding against us. It wasn't really a fair fight. But those were the tactics that they had to resort to, because we were posing a very serious, very real threat.
I do agree with you, Marky, that we have to keep the energy, and also Tish, we have to keep the energy really close to home. It has to be with those of us who are fighting, right? So do not get confused that the folks at the top are have your interests at heart, right? You have your interests at heart, and you have the interest of the place in the world that you live in. You want that world to continue, so you're going to be able to fight for it using private right of action, like South Africa has, where literally, the concept that you're saying, Tish, about community rights, right? It's the community's right to protect the nature, the world in which it exists, and nature, not in some kind of colonial vision of nature, but the ecosystems in which, and that's one of the problems with rights of nature, right? Is it kind of harkens back to that colonial idea, as opposed to we are in a living world and we have to live alongside it. We are part of it, as you said, Tish. But I want to just say, Marky, one of the things that is a mistake is to think that we always have to fight for new law. We can have the law we've got and make that law do what it hasn't done before, right? So if you live in a civil law system, you need to get a new piece of law on the books. But if you live in a common law system like us, you don't. You can say we have tort law. Tort law comes from the French word tort, which means wrong. There's a wrong that has been done here. There's an injury here. And as long as you understand that trees can be injured, right? That's the standing rules that we're talking about in the, the Sierra Club case, right? If you understood that trees can be injured and trees could be arguing against that injury, then the law is there for you. You don't have to go get it. So the tort law is already there. This is why you need to be working with lawyers who are on the side of the community, because it's not like you have to start again. There's some things you have to start again. You do need a people's charter. You do need to do what you did in Toledo, right? That was fantastic. You need to do that, but you don't have to, there is also other areas of common law that you could call upon to do this kind of radical work.
Yeah.
So
I mean, sorry, Joanna. Okay.
I just wanted to bring into the conversation here an audience question which feels connected to these questions of power and strategy that you're talking through. So Eduardo Costa brings up the example of Brazil and says, okay, so the rainforest is being increasingly devastated in Brazil, and the government seems to be moving in a direction where they're actually chipping away at safeguards that have been put in place there. And, I'm also thinking about the dramatic shift in attitude between the Trump administration and the Biden administration towards what our responsibilities towards the environment should be. And so I would love to hear your reflections on how to go about trying to move towards permanent change, permanent improvement, when our political system does not have permanent parties in power, and when the kind of the ideology that's behind our government can flip every couple years. That must be a real challenge.
Right. That's why we try to work with the constitutional change, because once it's in the Constitution, it's much more difficult to, just toss it out and get rid of it. I mean, of course, the systems and that's the other thing. We have this belief that a movement, once we win, and I put that in quotes, right? The tradition that it's all fixed, right? Like the Clean Water Act got passed. So isn't that great? Like all the water is taken care of. The government's going to protect it now, and the EPA and all that. Well, that's the mistake that activists make, and us as citizens and residents, that it never ends. So because it is about power shifting. And so when you get a little bit of power, we actually do a chart on this in our democracy school. We do too. You can see it with every single movement that, once the people actually do get some of that power, the other side comes right back to get it back. They don't just go, oh, well, they got it, so we'll just let them have it. But it's like the residents are tired because it's a much harder fight for the people, right? So, and they think that now we won. And so we focus a lot on that whole idea of what's a win and what's a loss, because we can't let them frame that either. Lake Erie, they'll frame that as a loss and use it as a way to shut other communities down. Whereas I say it was a huge win. It was a genie out of a bottle. I mean, we wouldn't be here probably talking to you today if that hadn't passed, and they know that. So it's in our own heads, and that's a lot of where the shifting has to happen, is in our own minds. We have to believe in this in our hearts, what we're doing, and that it's right. I think of all the other movements, and it's that same thing. You have to believe this to your core.
I really agree with you, Tish, on this question of constant struggle, right? This is another challenge to our side, is that it's work. It's a lot of work. And I do really like the one figure in the movie who says this kind of work is not for the faint-hearted. Like you're going to have setbacks, and you absolutely, once you're dealing with power, you can be absolutely sure power's not going to say, roll over. It never has, never will. I think, we have a lot of Frederick Douglass told us that a long time ago. And so did Nelson Mandela. But I do think that when it comes to Brazil, I'm so happy to hear from Eduardo da Costa, because he was one of the people who put this right on my radar at the very beginning. I don't know, long ago, Eduardo, when you were saying the problem with law in the Amazon is that, there'll be a law that's passed that says that we're going to protect 20% of the Amazon. Oh, this is so wonderful. And then what that actually means, as I recall, you pointed out so beautifully, you ran to the chalkboard and showed us on the chalkboard that means 80% of the Amazon is open for business, right? So we do have to wrestle with this fundamental question, which is, what are we asking for the law to do, right? Is the law simply a way to regulate harm, or are we asking for the law to actually protect? And there's a lot of precedent to ask for the law to protect. And the rights connection here is strong because there's a respect. There's an entire analytical framework that goes along with human rights, and protect and fulfill is one of the ways in which we understand how human rights work. So why shouldn't that be also how ecosystem rights work?
Bit and also connect to what Eduardo is saying about Brazil. But I would say that this goes beyond really what is the political party in power, and it goes also to what the state and the settler colonial state is, and precisely the never-ending problem of enforcement in human rights, and now also in the rights of nature. Because like I bring the case of Colombia instead. Okay, Colombia says the Amazon region is a subject of right, and it hasn't established this Supreme Court ruling which part of the Amazon region, like for example, in Brazil. And it seems to be a very progressive ruling that is going to bring a good, but then what's happening with that? Because in the case of Colombia, this is not really, seems not to be slowing down deforestation. It's even helping to expose peasant community from their territories. So there are several layers here, and also I think that we have to go beyond an understanding of, okay, rights of nature is one kind of policies and laws. There are several kinds. The processes that lead to them take place in different cultural countries with different processes. So, I mean, here again, for me, it's very difficult to make only one question at a time. So my first question would be like, very punctually, in the US, what have we seen so far regarding the enforcement of any of these mostly local, I understand, measures and charts and Bill of Rights? Yeah, yeah, let's do just this one after this long introduction.
Yeah, and again, that's kind of our culture, I think. We want all the answers. We want a step-by-step guide. How does this work? I mean, realizing that we're in something brand new. There is no, Rights of Nature for Dummies book out there that we can pick up and read, right? It's like we're evolving and creating this as we go along. So even with the cell death laws, you can see, there's an evolution. We learn from each of the cases and what happens. And so then we revise them. So the communities we're working with now, we are definitely looking at the enforcement sections because of what the judge ruled in, Lake Erie's case or in some of the others. And so trying to come up with a different type of enforcement. But so again, the enforcement is always about, and what you guys were talking about, going to the higher levels, well, who gets to make the decisions? So who gets to decide? And we've seen what happens when we leave the decisions to the politicians to make, because we're living with the effects of that now, 40 years after all these great environmental laws were put in place here. We're on the verge of ecological collapse everywhere. So we know we can't do that again, right? So we don't want to repeat the same mistakes. So it's looking at ways to do that. Is it through an ecosystem advocate? And who gets to pick then the ecosystem advocate? Is it an ecosystem commission that maybe is elected by the people in the community? So all these different things are, being discussed. And we also don't dictate to the communities. It's very important because what we realize, this is a democracy issue. there's a sense of obligation and responsibility to everyone in the community. So trying to get as much of the community engaged in this and being involved in writing these laws. And who do they feel they trust that can make these decisions? And again, because it's at the local level, yeah, it may be different in different places. And I know we want it all to be at the top and have it, you know, like, so we can protect the planet, because we keep hearing that we only have so much time left. And so, you know, I think sometimes that paralyzes us then too in it, because it just seems so big and so daunting. And so I'll just give up and I'm going to like enjoy the rest of the time I have left before it all burns up, you know, and some of us can't do that. So we just keep plugging along, I think, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Tish, you were talking about the importance of accompanying communities in a certain way. And for sure, CLDF works with the participatory and bottom-up approach. And there is the case that was recently in press just in the past few weeks here in the US, and was the case of the Wikiwa and, sorry how I pronounce it, I don't know if I pronounce it right, but Iconocachi River in Orange County in Florida. So this question goes like, is there only one way or there are several ways to arrive to issuing laws and policies in favor of the rights of nature? And what does these different approaches bring to the table? Mm-hmm. And what is the spectrum of approaches that we have in the US regarding how to work towards the rights of nature? And yeah.
Right. Well, we did write a critique of the Orange County law, that law you're speaking about, Francesca, because that's what Marky mentioned, I think, earlier about, you know, we have to be careful because rights of nature is now almost becoming faddish, right? Like, oh, it's so cool, I'm into rights of nature, I like rights of nature. And so we're all going to work on rights of nature because it's the end thing to do, but they don't all have the same effect. And the worst thing that could happen is to, claim, and politicians are great at this, right? They'll take something, in Florida is a great example of this. So the Democratic Party, they actually embraced, because Florida has a ton of polluted water and a ton of issues, and people were putting pressure on about this. And the Democratic Party said, yeah, we'll put it in our platform, rights of nature. Well, that's on the front side. So that all sounds great. Oh, this is terrific. Well, at the same time, there was a bill introduced into the legislature to preempt rights of nature laws. So in other words, no local community can pass rights of nature laws. And what people didn't hear so much about in the election year, because it's, oh, Democrats are behind this, is that all the Democrats in Florida, when it came for a vote, up for a vote, the preemption, all voted for the preemption of rights of nature laws. So both parties, it was unanimous in the legislature. So, you know, it's like this public political face to get votes that we're supporting this, but behind the scenes, we're voting to preempt it, so it can't happen. And so we have to really be careful of that. I think we need to be much more savvy as, you know, residents and people who are looking, you know, and at the politics that's happening. And then the law that passed there, even though it claims to be about rights of nature and the river, there's some really disturbing things in it, I think. And one of it, you know, we don't want to go to all this effort and work and then in the end find ourselves in the exact same place. So one of the things that they put in there is that the humans, again, have the right to clean water. And we have to think about this. Are we really going to base this all again on, you know, humans being at the center? Because it's about more than that. It's not just, you know, and they're looking, and I've heard people down there and they're like, well, you know, this is going to, if we have polluted water, it's going to stop the economic development down here, the tourism, the, you know, more houses, people coming down here to live. Well, that's exactly why you have some of the problems you have. And so this, you know, we have to not do things to protect nature just because it's going to benefit humans. That's one key thing. They also don't, in that law, they basically come out and say that if this is in conflict with any state or federal law, the state and federal law takes precedence and we'll just back off, you know, so that's a problem. because we have to challenge that. That's a big part of why nature is being destroyed, because the state and federal levels are allowing it, like you all talked about already. You know, they're permitting the harms and all that. So in other words, if the state government issues a permit to harm the river there, they're basically saying in their law, well, I guess there's nothing we can do about it. But it's getting that benefit, like, you know, and all this publicity saying we passed this great law. So that's an issue. And they also in their law just are saying that only citizens have the right to clean water there. And they define citizen as people who have legal status in the US. So that kind of goes against, to me, everything, you know, I don't believe in that. The human rights, every human being plus every living entity has a right to clean water, at least in my mind. That's what I want to fight for. Not again, creating that division between people and who has the right to it and who doesn't.
I really appreciate what you've said, Tish. I think it's so problematic. Somebody wrote in the chat here that we have to be very savvy, as the word you used. We have to be very savvy to the ways in which language can be appropriated and directed back against us. I recently listened to Anthony Ray Hinton, who has been on death row and was thanks to Brian Stevenson and a bunch of other community lawyering type folks, right? The injustice of his case was made clear and he was released, right? And he said, we need to understand not that the system isn't working, but that the system is working, right? That when you have rights of nature reappropriated like this, right? When you have that language appropriated, and when you have the outrage of these people, you know, having this as part of their platform and then using it as a basis for preemption, that is a way in which the system is working. If we don't understand that, we're never going to win, because we need to understand these guys are not joking around, right? Like, this is like, they think we're stupid, but we're not stupid. Right? Like, so kind of keep your not stupid hat on is kind of the first thing that we have to do to be savvy, right? Like, we have to not believe people when they say they're on our side. We have to look at what they do, right? So watch the walk, not the talk. That's what I always say, right? Watch what people do. That's the side they're on. That's one of the first things you have to do to be savvy. I mean, the second thing you have to be savvy is to understand, listen, like, don't believe in fairy tales, right? Fairy tales are the things that, actually, fairy tales are much more like, I have a kid. I've been telling her fairy tales. They're pretty grim, right? So don't believe that something is better than it's likely to be, right? Like, you better just have like more of a realistic sense of what's actually going on. I really like your point too, Tish, that we can't have a system where we are trying to protect ecosystems and not protect humans. Like, why would you care about citizens and not humans? That's another sign that something is wrong, right? So if you're going through a checklist, right, something is not right here, that you got citizens rather than persons, that's a good sign that something's not right here.
Yep.
I'd like to do a very, very quick last question before we go to really the last question. That is, again, going this time instead to the micro of this. And I think that you and me were going towards that in this sense. So is like, what are the elements and the allies that made specific rights of nature cases and initiatives that you really worked in successful? Because like, if we want to like really, and if you can answer in bullet points, it's even better, because like, we want to also give some concrete elements to understand, yeah, this work, if this is there.
Mm-hmm. That's a hard question. And I think I would just try to answer with this idea that it comes down to redefining what it means to win, redefining what it means to have success. That if you are just looking at this from, how can I get my foot in the door? How can I get the win? How can I get the support? Versus how can I cause some confrontation and make meaningful change? You know, it's the difference between wanting to have the victory, even if the outcome isn't in your favor, even if it ends up being meaningless, like appealing a permit and then having the permit pop up again. Now all those issues have been ironed out, versus saying, I'm going to challenge this directly and be this advocate for a new framework. And I know I might not make it, but it's better than playing by those rules where I know I'm going to lose.
I think we need to look at this Ecuadorian case, right? This 2011 Vilcabamba River case, where you had people looking at the river being destroyed and exercising what in my country of South Africa we call it private right of action, and saying this river is not going to go destroyed without my trying to intervene. I'm going to try to slow this down. And they go to a court, and luckily whoever it was who was the judge in that case, they had the kind of cultural change that Tish and Marky are talking about, right? They had understood that there's more to protect here than meets the eye, that the law has protected so far. They were prepared to take a very innovative, creative step, even though there was no precedent for it. They were prepared to be the first ones because they saw the basic common sense of it, right? So you have to understand, you need the basic common sense in place on the part of the people who bring the case and on the part of the people who have jurisdiction to decide the case. So this is why it matters to do this education work, right? Who the judges are, what kind of legal education they have, whether they went to a proper law school like Yale Law School. I hate to say it, but that's one of the places where they teach you to fight for justice and not get confused, right? They have to go to a place that teaches them, don't get confused, don't sell out. Use the legal training that you are being given to do something with it. And that's what happened in that case, right? They had a remedial order. Like, they used the legal system for what it is now. They didn't have to change everything. They just had to be willing to put something new on the table, just the way that Justice Douglas was proposing to put something new on the table. Trees can be injured. Trees need to have lawyers arguing for them, and not just in Dr. Seuss books.
Ish.
Yeah, I'll just follow up with that. Again, the courts are only one, and I want to really emphasize that, one place. And we've started to talk about, Marky mentioned it before with the regulatory thing, that we give credibility. I know I've said to communities, and I said it years ago when I first got it, and they looked at me like I had 16 heads. But I said, well, what if we had a presidential election and nobody voted? I mean, it's a little hard, right? Like, zero voter turnout, right? In the United States, the greatest democracy in the world, and nobody here believes in the election, right? It's like, wow, that would make a huge statement. But even in the regulatory hearing, Jane Ann Morris, who I really, admire what she wrote, and she said that too. What if we had a regulatory hearing, they called it, and no one showed up? Because we give credibility to it. So what that means, and we're working with communities now on that, is that means the people have to come up with alternative systems, right? So if you think that the election that they're holding is illegitimate, what if the people hold their own election? We can get a hold of all the residents in the community who live there. Let's give them the choice. Do you want this fracking well in your community or not? If they're keeping it off the ballot and won't let you vote on it, let's take the vote anyway and see what happens. And, will it be legitimate? I don't know. Is that the legitimate election or the illegitimate election? The one that gave the people the choice. Same thing with citizen assemblies. There's lots of people talking about that. Maybe we need to, on the same night where council meetings being held or whatever, we're going to have our own citizen council assembly meeting, and we're going to start making decisions for the community. You delegitimize the current system by creating your own and not paying homage to it. So we, in a way, it's such a weird place to be, because we keep going to the system. And yet if we say the laws they're passing are illegitimate and unjust, we keep going there, though. It's like, I always equate it to, it's like the slaves going to their plantation owner, their masters, and saying, come on, please free me. Please free me. Well, I mean, they're not going to. So what are we going to do about that? And there is examples of this in history, but people are so in their heads confused, about what to do.
Sometimes you are freed, right? So Anthony Ray Hinton was freed by a judge, right? So I think you have to understand that there are going to be some of those conventional wins, and you're right that there are not going to be enough of them, and that there's a real risk, right, in using a system that you actually feel has not as legitimate as it could be. But I just really am concerned about the kinds of losses that we might be in for if we don't use the system we have. Right? I think we need to understand that there's some serious losses that we could be in for that we didn't really we haven't yet reckoned with. And so I think we if we can run both of these, right? Like you guys can run the, like, we've got to change the system, we have to blow it up, we have to do revolutionary, right? And I'll run the part of the system that says, let's work with what we have, let's find the revolutionary potential with what we have, let's not give up on what we have, let's not say human rights is for nothing because it doesn't have an enforcement system. It says, no, human rights needs to have an enforcement system. That's what the point was, right? So we just need to work like along different channels. We can't give up totally on the legal system
No,
we have.
and I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's a multi-pronged strategy. That's what,
Yeah.
that it's going to come from. So it's just like, it's not just the courts. It's going to come from pressure being put on all different places in different ways. So yeah, I totally agree. You don't get on that. Yeah, no, you don't get, I mean, we're not saying that to totally, but I mean, if we study our history, I mean, that's what the colonists did. They went to the courts and they like arrested the judges, handcuffed them, you know, took over the court. I mean, so we come from this really radical history, but yet we don't practice any of that history now. We've forgotten it all.
This is as being really exciting. It's a pleasure to see so much passion in this debate. We are already 3 minutes over our allotted time for tonight. And we have more questions coming from the audience, but like Joanna, I don't think that at this point, what should we do? For punctual questions, there is a lot of information online, and the site of CLDF is also a great resource. Also, the link of the documentary Invisible Hand as one of the pages that you find in that page. Sorry, I'm always miss the right word. It's all about links to different initiatives in the US. As a way to conclude, I have a broad question that is kind of also, yeah, I understand how it's difficult to answer, but like, where do you see the rights of nature going in the future? And in the US mainly, even though I would like to expand it to abroad too. I don't know if you can say a few words, but like, so yeah, in the sense of which are the promises, which are the challenges that you see going on now for the advancement of this paradigm?
I'll start if that's okay. I think it's promising to me that people know what the obstacles are. They know how so many of these stories have unfolded. They know that they're probably not going to find a lot of success on the first try. But despite all that, the power and the influence of the opposition, they come and say, we still want to do this. We still want to try. And I think that's really energizing to me. You know, people get tired of pleading with the gatekeeper and say, let's just tear down this wall. And to see that fight in people is always really promising. I do still think that, you know, our legal system is going to be a challenge, but the more that we make those cultural shifts, the more we're going to chip away at that barrier. And that's, to me, where that needs to be. Rather than putting a lot of my energy into making those arguments in court, it's rallying support and finding ways to bring people to that, to see what rights of nature can look like, and making sure we are bringing a lot of these cases forward so that these questions come up again and again and again and again, and the courts can see that we're not going away. We're going to keep being in here and fighting this. But I will say at the end of the day, I think change is really scary. And what it comes down to it for me is that when we're the ones that propose the change, when we can offer creative solutions, we have the opportunity to make the adjustments, have the discussions, figure out what works. Our solutions, our visions, our changes will be a lot easier to embrace and work through than ones that are forced on us through some kind of disaster or systems collapse, whether that's ecological or political.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you know, a lot of times what we do is and I put it in chat, someone asked the question, and, you know, start talking to your neighbors, to your other residents, because we're always talking to the wrong people. I was on a call today and it's all about talking to your legislators, talking to your electeds, and we're convincing them. We take all that data, all that research, all those test results, and try to convince them over and over and over. They already know it, a lot of them. And if they don't, you know, the corporations talking in their ear, the lobbyists are there, they're getting paid to be there to talk to your electeds. And we don't ignore, they've done a really good job of breaking apart community, making us afraid of our neighbors, making afraid of the people. And what they'll find, it's the same system that I talked about earlier, whether it's worker rights or election issues or whatever, it's the same system that works at work, keeping people from making change and creating the just and sustainable communities they envision. So instead of putting all that effort talking to people who aren't going to make the change, start talking to your neighbors, your community. Let's start talking about community rights. Let's start talking about rights of nature. There's a huge education component. So educate the community first, and you'll find lots of common bonds, because once you guys are all together, you have a lot more power.
I really appreciate this way of thinking. You know, I have teach in the area of peace building, and that's how I came to know Francesca. And there's like two kinds of peace building, right? One kind of peace building is where you just try to get to where the bullets are stopped, right? Like, so you have what's called negative peace, and that's usually brought about by states where they say, let's just have a ceasefire. We have that going on right now, right? Where we have everybody just trying to tell Israel, just stop doing this, right? But what we really need is conflict transformation. We need to understand people are in conflict, right? That's not new, right? But we do need to find out how to transform conflict so that we end up in that place that you're talking about, Tish, a sustainable place, what's called positive peace in the world that I know, peace building world. And instead of having the, you know, it's called Pax Populi, instead of, you know, the peace of the empire, right? It's the peace of the people. One cautionary note, and one thing that has worried me a lot, is to understand the question of race and how the environmental justice movement and the rights of nature movement work together. And I think we need to deal with that question. It didn't come up during this hour, but I do wonder, like, you know, we need to figure out how to run this movement really as a collective of people who are mostly on the wrong edge of power systems. And if we don't have people of color in this movement, that's another reason to worry about it.
Well, thank you so much to all of you. Thank you, Adme. Thank you, Marky. Thank you, Tish, for sharing your insights and perspectives and your passion with us tonight. And thank you, Francesca, for guiding us through this conversation as well. Hopefully all of you who are here with us tonight in the audience are leaving with a lot of new information, but probably even more importantly, with some new questions that are going to lead you to want to dig even deeper. So we have been recording this panel discussion, and we'll share this with everyone who registered probably at the beginning of next week. And in that email, we'll also share some resources that you can use to continue to educate yourself, your friends, your family, your neighbors about this issue if you are still interested. So again, just a huge thank you to all of you who are here with us today. Take care, and let's keep the conversation going.
Yep, that's the most important thing. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.